Thank you for the opportunity. As you may know, right, the state passed a mandate a few years ago to help implement Holocaust and Genocide education. Schools need to add it to their social studies curriculum. We were the lead organization, and everyone on this call helped in that passage. Some were even in this photo that I have in front of you. But we are here. The legislation passed, but we're here to give an update on the implementation challenges and opportunities. As Stu alluded to, there is legislation this year, HB 6203, which would give funding towards SERC, State Education Resource Center, to help further implement this bill. Because what we found, and Beth will get to, is what we're hearing from teachers needing, and some further implementation is certainly needed. And it's needed because the rise in anti-Semitism is real. I could sit here and reel off stats, but I'm not going to, but I certainly could. It's rising. Anti-Semitism is constantly changing. And a way to combat that is through education, which is why we are here. Margie?
So yes,
you wanted to say something? Yeah.
Yeah. So at the ADL, this is what part of what we do is monitor these stats. And this year in Connecticut, we had a 128% increase in hate incidents. And of course, behind that are real people, real kids, families, and adults calling us because they have been targeted with, you know, a 10-year-old saying to another 10-year-old, I want to finish the job that Hitler started and kill all the Jews. So it's real. And I just wanted to say a couple of things based on what I've learned from teachers around staff development. So those of you I hope will be tuning in, that our ultimate goal is getting high quality Holocaust and genocide education to students. And of course, the teachers are what's key. And so this is a pretty amazing group of experienced people that want to help you with the foundation and up-to-date resources, because we know it can be challenging for teachers to figure out what to teach it and how to teach it in sometimes a short amount of time that you have. So we're going to review why it's important during these challenging times to teach lessons of the Holocaust and other genocides. We're going to hear some important survey results and some helpful resources, and then next steps. And the last thing I want to say is that to give us a quote that I read recently for Holocaust Remembrance Day, it said, "It's easy on a day like this to reflect at something of a distance. The photos are grainy now, dusty artifacts from another era. It was a different world then, we tell ourselves, another place, another time. But fully grappling with the reality of the Holocaust isn't simple, because the camps and the brown shirts, before the consolidation of political power, before the millions of lives were extinguished, there were simply people, not altogether different from any of us, chose to see their neighbors as different, as other, as something less. It's a sadly familiar choice, one that we've seen generation after generation. And today, in this world of encroaching divisions, we've seen the swiftness of that choice, the failure to recognize ourselves and one another can accelerate into violence. So it's up to us to make a different choice, to choose empathy over apathy, to sow seeds of hope rather than hate, to embrace our shared humanity, no matter how we worship, what we look like, who we love, or where our families come from. So the teachers play a key role in understanding this history and its connection to today. And our message to you is that we are here for you, from a range of institutions, enormous resources. When you those of you who are here and those of you who will watch this, contact us. Tell us your questions, what you're grappling with, because we know this is hard and we want to help.
Thank you. Well said, Margie. Beth?
Thank you, Margie. Yeah, definitely well said. This quote comes out of the study that we did a few years ago, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that on the next page, but we just thought that this was an excellent quote that summarizes some of the responses that we got from teachers. Our study was both a qualitative and quantitative survey. So we had students were able to speak to various educators. And this is a quote that came directly from one of the high school history teachers that we spoke to. And especially because you'll see the time frame of when we conducted the study, it matched up with right before and during COVID. So we thought that this was a really great, I'm not going to read the whole quote because you can read it yourself. So Michael, the next slide. So this research was conducted between September and December of 2020. The way that this worked was that I ran a class of about 15 undergraduate seniors who learned a great deal, not just about Holocaust education, but about how Holocaust education was taught in the schools. And they learned about the mandate that was passed. And the goal here was to try to understand from Connecticut educators what their thoughts were on the mandate and what they thought about how they were able to teach for the mandate. And we had about 100 respondents to our quantitative survey. And then we conducted an additional 16 one-on-one between 30 and 60-minute qualitative interviews. Some of the findings that came out, and we have a much larger report. We're happy to share it with anyone who's interested. We can send it along, but we just wanted to highlight a few things that came out of it. 60% of the educators responded that they were not aware of what kind of resources were available for help. This wasn't just in terms of teaching the Holocaust, but also in terms of teaching other episodes of genocide. That was a real area that they felt like they were lacking in assistance, resources, help, guidance. And because of that, they lacked a great deal of confidence in teaching about other episodes of genocide. They were concerned as well about the lack of specification and accountability to the mandate. They felt that the language was pretty vague on purpose, and so they weren't quite sure, because of that, how they were expected to fulfill the mandate. And additionally, because of that, they had a large concern that there was a lack of coordination or collaboration among teachers. So for example, they weren't often sure whether the students were coming to them with previous knowledge or not. They would like to be able to expand on the knowledge that students have, but they often didn't know if they were starting sort of from, a baseline of zero, or if they were able to build off of what students had already received. And so there wasn't coordination not only between grades, but there also was no collaboration really among schools. And they were looking for that as well, so that they could share curriculum, resources, guidance, that kind of thing. Related to that, they also felt like they needed more clear and guided curriculum. They were really hoping to get some very specific curriculum, lesson plans, not just here are a bunch of resources, here are a bunch of things to read, but ways that they could sit down and work through what actual lesson plans would look like. And then finally, another thing that was of real concern to them was that they recognized that they were teaching these topics, not just to teach the content about the Holocaust or other episodes of genocide, but that they were doing it in order to help develop empathy among children, which really gets at that quote that Margie was sharing with us. Michael, next slide. Yeah. So some of the recommendations that came out of the research project, and this was based on what they were telling us. There's certainly some other smaller recommendations that came out, but this was sort of some of the main pieces. First of all, they would like this guidance on the curriculum. Like I said, some of them had some real concerns about the atrocities and horrors that can overwhelm students when they're teaching about these topics. And so they would like some help and guidance on that. They felt like maybe there's plenty of information on the content, but not as much guidance and resources on how to teach the content. They were looking to have a social studies coordinator in every district who would speak specifically to this mandate, so who could provide some of this consistency both within and across school districts. They were also looking for some curriculum that would span all of the different grades, so that they could then build upon it as students got older and moved through different grades. They wanted to have this recognition that they needed different materials for different age groups, and they would like to be able to go deeper with students as they get older and not have to go backwards and teach sort of the basic material that they felt students should already know in younger grades. And then finally, like I said earlier, they really felt like there was a need for more resources on other episodes of genocide.
And I want to add this. One of the other things JFAC, my organization, is working on behind the scenes through the legislative and appropriations process is additional staff at the Department of Education to help implement not just this mandate, the Holocaust and Genocide mandate, but other mandates as well. So we're working, again, to get this information that Beth learned, that this is what teachers need. You need additional support at the state level, and so we are working on that. Sorry, next, who's okay, impact on students.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Beth, that survey was so well done, really chock full of really essential and important information. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
I have to admit, I wasn't going to share this, but Avi, correct me if I'm wrong, but the word basher, it sort of means like something was meant to happen, something was meant to be.
Fate. Yeah, exactly.
Fate. Yeah, fate. Thank you. That's an easy way to describe it. So I received this email from a former student. If you wanted to understand the impact, hi, Ms. Ravens, I hope all is well with you and your family. I wanted to reach out and let you know that I have just accepted an offer to the London School of Economics for the Masters in International Relations program. I received the news today and couldn't help but reflect on the impact you, your genocide class, and the trips to Europe had on me. They inspired my love for international travel, passion for human rights, and desire to pursue a career in diplomacy. I'll never forget that. Endlessly grateful, and so on. I share that with you not because I want to give myself a pat on the back at all, but just to give you, it's the material that is so compelling that it gets students to behave this way, and they begin to understand how it is this really does impact how they live their lives. In terms of impact on students, one of the things that I've learned is from them is that they do believe that in a way Hitler and Stalin are still alive. That if we were to forget this event and others like it, it will allow the thoughts and ideas and behaviors of those maniacs to once again rear their ugly heads. And I think that's one thing I've learned from them. And the other thing I've learned is that while there are many in the world that can't bear to remember these catastrophes, my students remind me all the time that we cannot bear to forget them, and we must keep them in mind all the time. Michael, next slide, please. So how did we get here? Well, the mandate part, you can see I was invited to bring some students to the Capitol to testify, and this is an image of that. And in terms of what impact this had on the decision of the committee, it seemed to have an impact. Many thought it was the difference that made the difference. How often do you get a unanimous decision in any sort of governmental policy discussion? It doesn't happen very often. And you know, at times the dimension of the catastrophe are almost too great to grasp. We can feel paralyzed in a sense that what possibly can we do? The fear that we simply cannot have any impact on whatever might be happening. And that's why this meeting and meeting with teachers is so important, because it is courageous teachers, as courageous teachers, we must be those voices that argue against complacency and force our students to remember the catastrophe so that we can affect change. And Avi's heard me say this a million times, but this is what we need to do for our students is to remind them and convince them that they are all heroes in waiting. And they're just waiting for the opportunity to demonstrate their courage and their heroism, whatever situation they might find themselves, because there will be that moment when the moral choice will have to be made. And it's because of the work that we will have done that might help them make the difficult but appropriate decision. Next slide, Michael. I'll talk about who that is in just a second. But we know that the number of the number of survivors that can speak are dwindling. The number of World War II veterans is also leaving us, unfortunately, quickly. And I know that the impact that survivor testimony has on students. And while we still have an opportunity to do this, we must take advantage of it. If it's okay with you, I'm just going to read a brief passage from a student's response to the image that you see there. The picture is of Abby Weiner. Abby was a Holocaust survivor, passed away, I think it's like 4 years ago now. He was, without question, he was the greatest teacher I've ever had. This is an image of him when he was visiting Auschwitz back in 2001. But Tessa writes, I never can get through this. Hearing you moved me to tears. The honesty with which you presented your story was moving. I will admit that prior to hearing you, I was nervous. I am Jewish, and hearing stories of the Holocaust has often brought me grief. I was afraid that after hearing you speak, I would be left feeling a sense of disgust for the human race, knowing that we are capable of committing such horrible acts. However, the most prominent feeling that I left with that day was hope. I feel hopeful that humans are resilient and strong. I feel hopeful that more people are like you in your compassion, empathy, and kindness. I feel hopeful that people can unite like before to stand up for what's right and defend those who need defense. Thank you for sharing your hope with me. Just to close, so what might our job as teachers be? Somehow, miraculously, we must be the ones to help students hold on to the love and the beauty and the joy alongside of the grief and the fear and the pain. As I said earlier, I am unabashedly hopeful about the future. And while my students are a messenger to a time that I shall not see, I'm hopeful that in their hands, the message of love and compassion and integrity and nobility will be passed. Abby, as I said, was the greatest teacher I have ever had. He left an enduring imprint on my mind and his handprint on my heart. And I think as educators, we're capable of doing that for our students and making this world a better place.
I love you, Stu Abrams. You're a good man.
Don't ask my wife.
Thanks so much, Stu. And you can see clearly how that level of dedication certainly makes an impact on your students and the way that it continues from one generation to the next. So thank you. And thank you to the AFT for inviting us to speak to all the teachers. And thanks to everybody who is here to listen to this presentation. So as we've heard, there is sort of a disconnect between what we've discussed as the imperative, the obligation that we all feel and recognize of the importance of teaching this topic, and the challenges that exist to teaching what is a very difficult topic, while at the same time knowing the general lack of knowledge that exists among our students, among the next generation, not only as we can see in this headline from a survey on Holocaust knowledge, which it's every year we see another survey that comes out that reveals the striking lack of knowledge among our students about the history of the Holocaust, or for that matter, any other genocide from history. But we're also all aware that we are confronting a very real challenge about sort of just a general lack of knowledge, of historical knowledge at all, especially in a moment that we're living in when we are told that this is difficult history, these are difficult topics that somehow can be rendered politically controversial, which then discourages us from engaging with this history. And so we're very much here to tell you that not only do we have an obligation to teach it, but just because it is difficult history means all the more so we have an obligation to force our students to engage with topics that might be challenging and to help them develop the critical thinking skills that are so vital in this moment in which we're living in to confront not only a lack of historical knowledge, but be able to discern between fact and fiction, between truth and mistruth, between information and disinformation. One of our colleagues in this group who is not here with us for the program today, but is a professor of educational design and instruction at the University of Connecticut, my colleague Alan Marcus, has recently just published an article in The Conversation about combating anti-Semitism today, Holocaust education, the era of Twitter and TikTok. And so I've shared a copy of a link to that article in the chat. For those of you who are watching the recording, you might not be able to see it, but the title again is Combating Anti-Semitism Today, Holocaust Education in the Era of Twitter and TikTok. And one of the points that Alan makes in this is for us to recognize the very real danger that we are in the moment of how easily it is for conspiracy theories, for misinformation to spread online, and how it's not just our students, everybody is very susceptible to being misled by this type of information, which is leading not only to rampant forms of Holocaust and genocide denial and distortion, but a lack of understanding of any sorts of historical events. And so this is all the more so the reason that we have an obligation to teach this topic and make sure that our students are aware of critical thinking skills to be able to discern between fact and fiction. Michael, do you mind going to the next one? So I think the top is cut off slightly because we're in not in the slideshow mode. Okay, so one of the things that we hear from teachers in terms of thinking about how to grapple with this topic is that one of the challenges is that they don't know where to begin. Such a huge topic. How do we cover the enormity of a topic like the history of the Holocaust or the history of any other genocide for that matter, when we might only have a day or a week, or in some cases we have heard of schools that might have more time than that, but usually it's taught in very brief units. It seems overwhelming. And at the same time, we do have this challenge of there is so much information that is out there. How do we discern versus, what is the reliable information that we should be using, and know and understand how to use those sources? As my colleague Laura Hilton and I have argued, and you can see here a title of a book that we've co-edited, which Stu actually has a chapter in and Alan Marcus has a chapter in. We argue that we need to make a connection between the very excellent resources that are out there for the history of this topic and how to teach it, and translate that into real world educational materials that can be used with our students. And in order to teach the Holocaust and genocide, instruction has to be rooted in this deep and broad scholarly literature that has emerged, but we also have to be able to provide the resources to our teachers to be able to learn and understand. And I just offer this volume as one example of, it has 20 excellent chapters with sort of state-of-the-art research on the history of the Holocaust, but also how to use specific types of resources in your classes, how to teach using diaries, how to teach using memoirs, how to teach using photographs, a chapter by Mr. Abrams on how to teach using monuments and memorials, a chapter by Alan Marcus on how to teach using films. There are excellent resources that are out there, very digestible in terms of how to apply this in your classroom framework. What I would say, and one thing that I always repeat, is that even though it might feel overwhelming because it's such a huge topic and you don't know where to begin, it's more important to be able to teach one aspect of it and to do it well, rather than throw your hands up and say, well, it's too big and I can't touch it, and so I'd rather not go there, right? And we would much prefer that you focus in and drill down on one very specific topic, introduce your students to the topic. The worst thing that could happen is that they're curious and they want to learn more. So let's talk a little bit about the resources that are available. Let's go to the next slide. So you can see here, we've started to compile a list of resources that we have here in the state of Connecticut to provide resources for teachers on how to teach the topic. These are annual workshops and conferences that take place both at the University of Hartford, at the University of Connecticut, at Yale University. The Fortunoff Video Archive for Holocaust Testimony organizes regular workshops on how to use their amazing collection of Holocaust survivor testimony for teaching the history of this topic. So you can see a picture of it there. At the University of Connecticut, we're developing a new Holocaust and Genocide Education Certificate program, which is going to be a post-baccalaureate certificate that will be available both for pre-service and in-service teachers. It will consist of 4 classes that teachers can take. Some are institutes to make it easier to participate in the program in an intensive way for 2 weeks over the course of the summer. We have organizations in the state of Connecticut, some of which you've heard about, like the Jewish Federation Association of Connecticut, Voices of Hope, which is a wonderful organization created by descendants of Holocaust survivors, very much committed to providing resources for Holocaust and genocide education. Voices of Hope has a speakers bureau, which they will send survivors and descendants of survivors to come speak in classrooms. Margie talked about the ADL, the excellent curriculum called Echoes and Reflections, which some of you might be familiar with. And I've listed other resources there. I personally used to work at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. They have an excellent, amazing program of training teachers. I know that Stu Abrams has been a teacher fellow and has been very involved in some of the work that the Holocaust Museum has done. Excellent resources both on the USHMM site and elsewhere. The Shoah Foundation, the USC Shoah Foundation, there are so many excellent resources that are out there. You see here on your screen a picture from a website that we're developing at the University of Connecticut together with Voices of Hope and the University of Hartford's Greenberg Center. It's called Connecticut Remembers the Holocaust, and it should go live in the next few months. And it's a resource that provides both survivor testimony. You can see Abby Weiner, his testimony is available on the site, as well as curricula, very specific curricula for how to teach using these survivor testimonies, and to use curricula both on all levels, both for middle school and high school. So I'll stop myself there. We want to make sure to leave time for questions, but you'll see on the last slide, we have our contact information, and you should really feel free to reach out to any of us if you have questions. Mike, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Well, thank you, Avi. Appreciate the time, Jennifer. Again, I think the overarching theme is we're here. We're happy to be of service. If a teacher wants to contact us, please do. We are here. We are here for the teachers.
There is a question in the chat. Leslie wanted to know what age or grade level is best to start talking to students about this topic.
Who wants to field that one?
I can start. I'm sure each of you have thoughts on this one as well. And so I don't know what grade level Leslie's involved with it, but I'll just say that my suggestion is, and what I've seen is that it should not be started before middle school, and that's my personal opinion. But and even then, right, there are great appropriate ways to teach the topic. What we've often seen is that in middle school, it's usually done in a language arts environment, usually through the teaching of either specific books, which some of you might be familiar with, some from the Scholastic series. So things like the books by Alan Gratz or Resistance, if you're familiar with those, which are written with a young adult audience in mind. There's also some really great collection of memoirs from the Azrieli Institute in Montreal that is edited specifically for a young adult audience. Can be a good way to do it with middle schoolers. And then on the high school level, we'll often see it taught much more so in the context of modern world history, or Stu can talk about sort of doing it in the social studies framework. If Alan were here, Alan would be able to talk about also very much connecting, and the work that he has done and his group have done in connecting Holocaust and genocide education to the state social studies standards and making sure that the teaching lines up exactly with the required standards. I don't know if Stu, you want to add to that?
Well, I think that you've pretty much outlined what I would agree with wholeheartedly. I will say that I don't think that one size fits all. I don't think you can necessarily say, okay, here's what we're going to do in high school, here's what we're going to do in middle school. I think you need to, as teachers, we need to get a feel for our class, the maturity level, the ability level. I do think that that sometimes there are materials that I use some years and some semesters, and some years I just don't. So I do think you have to be sensitive to what the students are that you're working with. But generally speaking, I know at the Holocaust Museum, they sort of have an exhibit for those, I believe it's under 11, is Daniel's story, Avi, under 11?
Right.
And that's kind of a good barometer to use in terms of when to get into some of the more challenging material relative to this. Not sure that helps answer your question, but.
Thank you. Yeah.
I wanted to say something as well, because I've worked with a lot of New Haven teachers, not recently, so I don't know if it's still being taught, but I used to teach at Southern. I had a student who said, you know, a group of us in 5th grade are teaching a book called Hannah's Suitcase, and it's a literature. And I met with them, and they really didn't have the context to teach it. So I thought, you know, it's not up to me to decide the appropriateness, but I can help them with what is appropriate, what not to talk about, and ended up doing some workshops with a bunch of 5th grade teachers teaching Hannah's Suitcase, which is a marvelous book, by the way. So it's not that I'm sitting here advocating that it start younger, but in fact, it was or may still be. So we need to know what is being taught and then help and support and guide the teachers in how they teach it. Because again, a lot of them say to me, we just didn't get the background in our teacher prep. I think some of that's changing, but how am I supposed to know how to teach this? And, you know, and what's age appropriate? So that's a great question that I hope as a community of scholars and others we can continue to help with. And also, we always have to say this, but then there's materials. Sometimes teachers don't know that the boy in the striped pajamas is not something that we recommend. It's very important that you hear that, because a lot of schools are using that still. And if you want to know why not, we can talk about it. I think there's still a piece on the ADL, the Echoes and Reflections website. Others in this group can speak about it, but we're not faulting you, because sometimes we just don't know that we have good intentions, but that is truly one resource I know I don't recommend. I don't think anyone else here would. So yeah, that's why the critical thinking is so important, and reaching out for help so that you can do this effectively.
I'll just jump in on that piece, and I'm so happy you mentioned that, Margie. So Alan Marcus has written very, very specifically, and you can probably Google, I think, an article that he's written about why you should not teach the boy in the striped pajamas. He also, in that chapter on using film to teach the Holocaust, also explains why. And I'll just say as a sort of very briefly, you know, even the author, what's his name, John Boyle, says it's a fable, right? It's ahistorical. It's historically inaccurate and implausible, and there's a lot of it that just is misleading in terms of the history of the Holocaust. And there's a number of reasons that Alan outlines as to why it's not a good resource. But one of the things I'll say is that when you teach the topic, it's not enough to just sort of choose one specific example of the topic. And there's so many different examples. It could be, you know, Stu has talked about heroes in waiting, and, you know, choosing to teach about the topic of rescue, or choosing to teach about the topic of resistance, or teaching about, you know, collaboration, or the life of survivors in the immediate aftermath of the war, which I find to be resilience, amazing as an example of resilience. But I think one of the important things is to ask the question of, why am I teaching this, right? What is the learning outcome that I hope to achieve in the teaching of this topic? And it's really important to have a specific goal in mind. So you're not just throwing very difficult information at your student, but at the forefront is, why am I teaching this topic? So I'll give an example. You know, in American history classes, for example, I've encouraged using resources. Some of you might be familiar with this new documentary that came out this year by Ken Burns, The U.S. and the Holocaust, which was very much influenced by an exhibit at the Holocaust Museum called Americans and the Holocaust, which is a wonderful exhibit and has great resources online. And it's a really excellent tool to teach about the American response to not only World War II and the Holocaust, but to the refugee crisis that preceded it and the refugee crisis that continued during and after the war. And if that fits the learning goals of a unit that you're teaching about American immigration policy in the 1920s and 30s, it can be an excellent way to introduce sort of teaching about the history of the Holocaust to a class on this topic. And there's a lot that you could then do with it. And you would have covered a really interesting aspect of it and introduced your students to it, and hopefully, you know, cultivated curiosity for them to want to learn more. So just a few examples of specific topics to engage with to teach this history. Jennifer.
Can I just say, Leslie, a lot of the work that we have actually done in education over the last couple of years to refocus on the whole child in terms of social and emotional learning, that, like what Abby, when you were saying, it's not just the history. There is another goal, right? Part of the goal is to teach empathy, right? To help our students. And I am the mother of a 14-year-old on the autism spectrum, the hallmark of which is a lack of empathy, is a lack of perspective. And I was so pleased that my son read Night this year. And he and I had to have some really important conversations, because there are some really complex feelings, really complex thought processes that he wouldn't have known that perspective if it wasn't explicitly taught. Some of our students need to be explicitly taught empathy, right? So maybe some of the harder facts, some of the stronger, more, what's the word I'm looking for? Unhappy, really unhappy things that we have to talk about. We have to talk about them. Maybe that's not appropriate till a little bit later, but I'm so pleased in education that we have re-envisioned our focus, which is this whole child, and teaching empathy and teaching appreciation and respect for each other and dignity in all life, right? So I would say that we can start teaching those lessons very, very young. And my son goes to Bristol. He's read Number of the Stars. As I said, Night was very powerful. And I think part of what we need to do as educators as well is not be afraid to start talking to our parents, because we need to delve into this in more than one forum. My son didn't get everything he needed to get out of that book in the classroom. He and I had to have a lot of discussions about pain and what pain can do to people, and how pain can change your perspective, and how you can also break through that, right? And come out in a place where you move past that pain to something a little bit brighter. So I would just say that, and I would be hopeful that in education, I know Stu, I know teachers are already doing this, right? Teachers have been doing this forever, but the fact that the people at the State Board of Ed now are on board with us being explicit in our teaching of things like empathy gives me hope as well.
Can I say also, because of what you're saying as a parent, you know, and teachers, I've talked to a lot of teachers about how do you take young people safely in and safely out. You know, so the end of your class, you're in the middle of talking about Night, then they're heading to math class. And if you're not doing transitions, it leaves students with a lot of these feelings and they don't know where to go. And not everybody has a parent like you, Jennifer, who has the background and the time and the initiative. And I get concerned when you learn about genocide. Where do you go with all those feelings? And again, we want to support teachers. So if you want to have conversations, I'm excited about this new certificate program at UConn, and all the universities have different kinds of things. I want teachers to know you're not alone, and that, you know, we want to hear you. And I think Beth's research showed so much of that. And I just hope that that's how we'll continue to answer questions like, how do you take students safely in and safely out? Where do you start? And I've had teachers say to me, my kids don't relate to the Holocaust. I've had teachers say, I feel like I have to teach the Holocaust without talking about anti-Semitism. And I have to not look shocked and say, teaching the Holocaust and you're not talking about anti-Semitism. Yes, that has happened. And I've had teachers say, well, we don't have Jewish students, so why are we teaching the Holocaust? And, the Holocaust isn't about Jews, it's about hate. But we do need to teach about anti-Semitism, and we need to learn about history with different groups, all different groups. So, these are all things teachers have said to me that they grapple with, but they're afraid to bring it up because they don't know, they don't want to get judged for it. So we're not here to judge, we're here to be a resource.
Jennifer, if I can just jump in for a second, commend you on your parenting with your son. I think a lot of parents, it reminds me a little bit of the memorials and monuments, but a lot of parents act in a similar way in terms of, I'm really glad my child is learning about this stuff, and I'm really glad I don't have to do the teaching. And so in this case, here you are saying, you know what, this is not only something that needs to be discussed and taught in the school, but rather something that needs to be discussed and drilled down into at home as well. And it's the same thing with memorials. People like say, gee, I'm really glad this event is being remembered by that piece of stone or metal, but I'm really glad I don't have to do it because it's painful. It's uncomfortable. So the goal of a memorial artist is to say, well, when somebody visits this memorial, they will take it upon themselves for the obligation to do the remembering. And as parents, yes, they need to be involved with this as well.
I had just one other question, sorry. We actually had a webinar with Newsella. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Newsella. It is a online platform that a great number of districts in the state of Connecticut have started using since COVID. And what it is it's curated resources. It is actual articles. It is really good, high quality curated resources for teachers. And what's interesting about the product is it's able to differentiate based on the lexile level or the reading level of each student and their ability to comprehend. So it can take, and I saw this firsthand again with my son, there were a number of articles and resources about the genocide in the Sudan that he learned about. And he was able to have articles at multiple reading levels. So again, we're talking about equity issues with our students. How can we make information accessible to our students? Yeah. And they have a whole curriculum, like Black and Latino curriculum. And I'm wondering if I have to look into it to see if they have something, specifically for the Holocaust and genocide, but it's very curated. Our teachers like it for that reason. Again, it can be very differentiated based on student needs, making things very accessible. It has that equity lens, which is something we're always looking for. It is a paid product. So I don't want to not every district uses it, but a lot of districts do. And if you guys have not connected to Newsella, I think something like that might be an opportunity to say to them, what do you have? And do you need help? Newsella, do you need help? We can help give you resources because a lot of our teachers are diving into that. So just an idea.
Thank you for that.
I know we have a few teachers with us. Does anybody have, any questions or observations? Some of you, I think, probably have had a lot of teaching experience. How can we attract more teachers to programs like this and provide this kind of guidance?
So I'm a teacher and I want everybody to congratulate me. I'm leaving teaching March 31st. I began in 1978 with 5 years of on and off. So thank you for listening, because I'm very excited, but I'm very disappointed of the teacher profession. So it inspires me to know that there are programs like this that are being developed, or resources for teachers who are just at this point treading water to survive. We don't even have enough energy to throw out our life vests, or our, what do you mean, to help them out. It's all hands on deck all the time. And this is great that there will be a place that I can share with my colleagues, this resource, because I'm retiring. But I have taught, I would call it cultural awareness or education. Like in my younger years, I used to, bake the latkes in, self-contained special ed. And, it's not safe, but, that's cultural. So this is wonderful, because if we make aware the Jewish religion and culture, I think the similarities that all cultures have will support the learning and the empathy that we have. Like, I'm a white Jewish older woman. My dad fought at the Battle of the Bulge 3 years or 4 years ago. We did go with my 23-year-old son. He wanted to go to Europe, and we went to the beaches, Omaha, because, my dad fought at the Battle of the Bulge, and my son has taken all the memorabilia. It's great. But, that we actually get authentic activities. I remember when I first started for Hartford, I had my 4th through 6th graders in self-contained special ed. Who knew, And they performed, I think it was a Christmas performance, when they do in school, one of the dances, an Israeli dance. And it was great. It was just so wonderful. And then it's exposure, because what do people know about the Jewish people? What do we know about the Black culture? I mean, I just learned that how difficult it is for Black women to keep their hair looking good. I almost cried, because it's a lot of work. So if we all I know you're letting me talk on and on. I really appreciate it, because I'm a teacher, and it's very tough right now, because all they want students to learn are skills. So if a teacher understands that there are skills you can incorporate into teaching this topic, like I once worked in a state hospital, and one of my teenage students was resistant in learning English, and that's what I had to do for the school district, because he was in state hospital, and you have to do it that way. So we wrote a speech, his mayoral of Boston acceptance speech. So when we incorporate any type of topic, so it's authentic, and we can, just learn about it. And for teachers, there's that writing goal that would be great, like make the diary that of your life, to compare like with humanity. So it's a whole cultural thing. So I'm going to volunteer. Okay, Jen, I'll be calling you.
Margie, the other thing I would say is, again, I really hope you are not discouraged and you don't feel in any way, shape, or form that this was a waste of your time, because what I have learned about COVID is people are incredibly selfish about their time, and they are very much used to everything on demand. So even all of our professional development, we have started recording it because people want to sit in their jammies and they want to watch it when they want to watch it. All of our stuff nationally, a lot of our workshops and our professional development nationally is on-demand webinars now. So I think that like the time of people, unless we do food, right, Leslie? Leslie knows. Anybody's heart is through their stomach, right? Unless we're doing food and unless like you're totally into communing with people and stuff like that, for the most part, people are looking for like the fastest, quickest, easiest way to access the information that they want. So we've had to adapt. So I do think that having something like this in an online space, having a copy of this workshop on the State Department of Ed's webpage would be helpful, because that's where people go. I'm going to talk to my counterparts at CEA and say, have you done this yet? You need to do this. This is really good. Let's make sure it's accessible to everybody. I think you guys should tap into superintendents. I think you should tap into administrators. I think this is more than just about teachers. I think we need to open it up to paraprofessionals, right? We have a school community, and this needs to become a priority. Everybody at every level.
Yeah.
Agreed.
So-
Right, we've talked to CAPS, we're trying to get to CEA, so we're K, all the acronyms, we're slowly getting to them all.
Jennifer, by the way, I would absolutely and totally agree with you about the food part. At all of the stops that we made on our bus ride, we broke bread at each place, and we tried to keep it culturally appropriate at each location, each house of worship as well. And you're right, Leslie, we're much more the same than we are different, whether it's religions or cultures or any of that stuff. And that's an important lesson to learn.
And I do think, Margie, a lot of it also has to do with the way things are rolled out. And I agree with Leslie, the majority of our teachers, everything just feels like a new mandate, and it feels like the plate is too full. And we need to start taking things off of that plate. And by the way, I would say, I know you were talking about money in terms of trying to get money to support this, the legislation. Model curriculum from the State Department of Ed on how to scaffold this learning over the years, so that our students do see that through line, so that our teachers see that through line. So, I mean, that's the kind of stuff that we need to do. And that's also an equity issue, because there are really rich districts that have all the resources in the world, and they can design their curriculums and they can do all the scaffolding and everything else. And then there are places like Hartford, they're never going to have enough money for anything. And that's, again, where the State Department of Ed comes in. If this is a priority for the people of Connecticut, for the legislators of Connecticut, if this is what our elected officials that we voted on, pass this legislation because this is important to us, State Department of Ed needs to support that work. And they can do that by creating a model curriculum. And they're not going to like me for saying that. And they'll probably see this and not be happy with me that I've added more to their plate, because they're underfunded and overwhelmed as well. But that's the kind of stuff we need to do. I don't think it's that teachers aren't interested. I don't think it's that they don't want to do this well. I think they're like just fried, and they need somebody. That's why I said, hey, maybe Newsella, because again, they're looking to that for very curated resources that are a little bit more just printed out, because sometimes that's all they have time for. It's not that they want to do it that way, but sometimes that's all they have.
So I'm glad you said it, Jennifer, because honestly, I've worked thousands of teachers, and as I'm winding down my career here, I think teachers are my heroes, like Stu said, and that's why my message, and I think my colleagues share this, is that's why we're saying we want to help, definitely not to criticize. So if anybody heard that, definitely not meant as criticism. Teachers are up against it, and everybody by this time of night wants to be in their PJs. We did learn that from COVID, and so the more we can do that's accessible. But I personally or professionally, where I am is, I want them to learn the history, but I want them to be able to have like a support opportunity to share what they need, so we can be helpful in removing those blockades. Because teachers taught me from New Haven, again, in my early days, I said, what do you need most in terms of professional development 32 years ago? And you're right. What did they say? Food. Why? Because we want to be respected. We often feel not respected. So when I started Echoes, I found a donor for every single full day program to pay for lunch for the teachers, because I heard it so loud and clear that I did anything I could, because I so respect teachers and teachers' time and how hard it is to learn every one of these topics and be able to teach it effectively. So we are, that's part of our message. We're not alone, and work really hard and let us help.
I'll send you the new presentation. Thank you for the time. Hope to hear from some of your members and how we can help.
This has been absolutely wonderful. I appreciate all of you taking the time to come and to share this. And we will continue to make sure that from our point of view, we are supporting our teachers, and we are connecting them to people like you who can support them so that we can all do this important work together. And I have a call into my CEA counterpart tomorrow, Michael Blumen, and she's going to hear an earful about how spectacular this was. So you'll be getting a call soon.
Thank you very much, Jennifer.
Thank you. Thanks for
Thank
having
you.
us.
Everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.